Hey everyone, welcome back. Today, we're diving into Unit 03, Lesson 03, Sparta and Comparative Civic Life Video Overview. We are going to completely peel back the layers on the ancient world in this explainer. We're moving past the flashy Hollywood movies to figure out what ancient Greece was actually like, just using the hard evidence they left behind.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our roadmap. First, we'll hit 3 ancient Greek misconceptions, then examining the historical evidence, followed by claims, bias, and limits. After that, we'll do a deep dive comparing Athens and Sparta, and wrap up with shifting perspectives in civic life.
All right, Section 1. 3 ancient Greek misconceptions. Busting the myths.
So, let's bust 3 massive historical myths right out of the gate. Myth number 1. All Greek city-states had the exact same civic system. Yeah, absolutely false. Myth 2. Athenian democracy included literally everyone. Again, definitely not true. And myth 3. Sparta was just one giant, purely military camp. Completely false. Stick with me because by the end of this explainer, you'll have the actual evidence to prove exactly why.
Moving right along to Section 2, examining the historical evidence. How do we know? Take a look at this. It's an absolutely stunning physical artifact, a white ground jug from Athens dating all the way back to 490 BC. It's actually housed in the British Museum today. Notice the woman spinning wool? Everyday objects like this are like a giant puzzle piece for us because they show the quiet, objective truth of daily tasks. There's no secret political agenda here. It's literally just a snapshot of regular domestic life.
And that's exactly why we have to split our historical evidence into 2 main buckets. On one hand, we've got physical artifacts. We're talking everyday objects, tools, pottery, stuff that just managed to survive the test of time. They don't lie. But on the other hand, we have written texts. These are accounts from ancient authors, and unlike a piece of pottery, these writings are packed with the author's own strong opinions and, quite frankly, their personal prejudices.
Which leads us to Section 3, claims, bias, and limits. Reading between the lines.
Now, what's really interesting here is this quote from an ancient author we call Pseudo-Xenophon. People also call him the Old Oligarch. He's writing about the Athenian constitution. And just listen to how intense this is. He says, "Inasmuch as in making their choice, they have chosen to let the worst people be better off than the good." Wow, he is not holding back, right? He is incredibly harsh when talking about the common people in Athenian democracy.
So what are we looking at here? It is a textbook example of source bias. When we look at history, we absolutely have to recognize the limits of our sources. Bias happens when an author's background, their wealth, or their personal prejudices heavily influence how they record history. Pseudo-Xenophon was likely an aristocrat, a very wealthy, high-born guy. He favored the rich, who he called the good, and he really despised the fact that a democracy gave power to the poor, who he literally referred to as the worst. We really have to keep his personal lens in mind when we read his claims.
All right, Section 4, comparing Athens and Sparta. A tale of 2 systems.
Let's actually put these 2 famous city-states side by side. If we look at government, Athens was a democracy, giving political power to the poor masses, whereas Sparta was a really strict oligarchy run by a wealthy elite. Now, what about education? Well, Athens focused heavily on the arts, athletic contests, and musical choruses. But Sparta? The author Xenophon tells us all about Lycurgus's intense system. Spartan boys were put under a warden, forced to go barefoot to toughen up, and fed super limited rations so they'd learn to keep working on an empty stomach. For labor, Athens leaned heavily on resident foreigners, called medics, and enslaved people to keep their society and their huge fleet running. Sparta, though, relied on an enslaved group called helots, who were basically kept in a constant state of fear. Finally, what were the big public expectations? Athens wanted naval dominance and economic wealth. Sparta? Their whole goal was to produce resourceful, hardened fighting men.
So, looking at all that data, we can make a really solid historical claim. Athenian naval dominance relied heavily on the labor and participation of the lower classes, medics, and enslaved people. And how do we back that up? Ironically, we use Pseudo-Xenophon himself. Even though he despised the democracy, he couldn't deny the facts. He outright admitted that it was the poor people manning the ships, rowing those oars, and giving the city its actual power. Without the poor and the foreigners, Athens' empire just wouldn't exist.
And this brilliantly illustrates our final segment. Section 5, Shifting Perspectives in Civic Life, Walking in Their Shoes.
I want you to really think about this question for a second. How did your status change your reality in ancient Greece?
I mean, imagine your entire life flipping completely upside down just based on the city you happen to be born in, your gender, or how much money your family had. Let's try stepping into their shoes.
First up, imagine you're a free citizen man. If you live in Athens, even if you don't have a lot of money, you can stand right up in the public assembly, speak your mind, cast your vote, and get paid a wage to row in that majestic naval fleet. But over in Sparta, your whole life is about enduring pain for honor. You're actually encouraged to steal food to learn stealth. But if the warden catches you, you get severely whipped, not because you stole, but because you were bad at stealing and got caught.
Now, what if you were a woman? The expectations were wildly different. In Athens, the ideal was quietly managing the home and the family. Remember that gorgeous white ground jug artifact we looked at earlier? That is the perfect illustration of the Athenian reality: domestic weaving, running the household. But in Sparta, women were expected to be out there doing intense physical exercise. The state believed, that strong, physically fit women would produce strong Spartan soldiers. A total night and day difference.
And for enslaved persons, the contrast was absolutely staggering. Our biased friend Pseudokonophafine was genuinely shocked by Athens. He complained about what he called the uncontrolled wantonness, basically a severe lack of discipline among enslaved people there. He pointed out you couldn't even strike them in the street because they dressed exactly like free citizens, and some even managed to become quite wealthy. He contrasted that directly with Sparta, where an enslaved person lived in strict, absolute terror of the citizen class.
Finally, let's talk about the metics, the resident foreigners in Athens. If you were a metic, you definitely weren't a full citizen, but the society literally could not function without you. The ancient texts admit that Athens desperately needed foreigners for their trades, their crafts, and absolutely crucially, to help man that massive naval fleet. Because of this huge economic need, Athens actually had to grant them a surprising level of equality just to keep the city afloat.
So what does this all mean? The absolute biggest takeaway today is that history is never just a single, simple story. By looking super closely at physical artifacts and learning how to read between the lines of those heavily biased ancient authors, we can strip away the myths. We get to uncover the real humans of history, the wealthy, the poor, the free, and the enslaved, who are all just navigating entirely different realities. Which leaves us with one final thought. If your entire life, your education, and your freedom depended purely on which side of a mountain you were born on, who would you have been in the ancient world? All right, that wraps up Unit 03, Lesson 03, Sparta and Comparative Civic Life video overview. Keep questioning history, and we'll catch you next time.